Hello again, everyone. This is Yalak. The date is July 15, 2018. This is another lesson in the New Testament is Fake series. This is lesson number 153. This lesson is titled Checkmate for Messianics. So, Messianics, whether you're in an Israelite camp or you're in the other Jesus-believing religions, this lesson is going to strike down the Messianic belief. This is a checkmate for the people who are teaching the Torah, who believe in the Messiah known as Jesus that supposedly came and died 2,000 years ago. This is checkmate for Messianics. I'm basing this thought on the teaching that I heard so much from some Hebrew Israelite camps that believe in Jesus when I left the Christian church at first, that says that world in the New Testament meant the world of the Israelites. And I heard that so much that even I believed it. Even after I started the New Testament is Fake series and realized something was wrong with the New Testament, I still continued to believe it. I think there is even a lesson in the series where I even said that the world there, I would have to agree with these other camp teachers that it is the world of the Israelites. But as I have clearly shown through many of my videos, that I'm not the same kind of teacher that so many of us are, where I'll just go on in spite of. I can turn back and say I was wrong on this or wrong on that, or I need to look into it some more and so on. And so, at that point, having strongly believed it, I said at one point, yeah, I can agree with them that it is the world of the Israelites. And Jesus would have come, if he lived, to the Israelites, because the Christians or Gentiles in general are just saying that Jesus died not just for the Israelite but for everyone on earth. So they were saying the world there, like in John 3:16, for God so loved the world, it means the world of the Israelites. Now I'm going to correct that thought and show how wrong that is. Or rather, show how fake that makes the New Testament, is what I should say. Now, look at this. I'm looking here now. John chapter 1, verse 1 and 10. In the beginning was the Word. And they're saying this Word was Jesus, basically. And the Word was with God. So they're saying Jesus, even though they call him by many Hebrew names that they make up, was with God. So this Word, Jesus, the so-called Son, was with God. And the Word was God, or Jesus was God. That's why they don't have any Palm Sunday teaching in Hebrew Israelite Messianic camps or in Christian churches that Jesus was God, or they just tell you today he is God. Let's run down to verse 10. Remember now, this is the killer verse, which I'm going to read from John chapter 1, verse 1. Then I'm going to really go into it and checkmate these people who are talking about the world. He was in the world, and the world was made by him. So the saying was made by Jesus. And the world knew him not. They use this to teach that, see, Jesus was in the Old Testament, or whatever Hebrew words they call him by. Some call him Yasha, Yeshua. Yeshua HaMashiach is another term you'll hear. Yahawashai, you'll hear Yahshua. So they've got their different kinds of ways to call him. Some just say plain old Jesus or Jesus. And some just say Joshua. But we're talking about this 2,000-year-old Messiah who supposedly came and died for people on Calvary. And Hebrew Israelites are saying that the world that he died for in the New Testament was Israelites. It was the world of the Israelites. But look at what it says here. Because they use this verse, John 1 and verse 10, to say this helps to prove that Jesus was in the Old Testament, in all these other prophecies, Psalm 22 and every place else that he appeared in the Old Testament, even from the Garden of Eden, when it says that the Lord clothed them with coats of skin. They're saying, see, he made a sacrifice right there. The first sacrifice pointed to Jesus for Adam's sin and so on. And my question has always been, if God himself made a sacrifice, or Jesus made the sacrifice for sin, the first sin, to nip it at the bud, cut it down at the roots, to cut out the root of sin from the very Garden of Eden where sin was done first, why does there need to be another sacrifice at Calvary later on, or many sacrifices in the Torah days? If the sacrifice was done for sin from the very start by the God of Israel, or the Creator, or Jesus being in the Garden of Eden, right from the inception, the start of this whole thing, why is there any sacrifice needed later on by Jesus or any Israelite in the Old Testament? You know, when you get some kind of a bad sickness, a lot of times you can stop the stuff, and doctors will tell you, even when you get a tumor, you don't want that growing cancerous, like you need to get that dealt with very fast. So usually when you get some kind of sickness, you want to start dealing with it right away, because usually they can just stop it. You might have to come in, if it's a serious matter, then you might have to come in for a checkup the next year and so on, just to make sure it's not creeping back up. But normally, you attack stuff right away. Just like with your car, you hear something bad going on, you try to deal with it right away, because if you leave it with the bad sound, the car might just break down. You can't just drive it like that for months when you hear something going on in the engine. So, the Creator dealt with it from the Garden of Eden when sin came in, when they fell, and supposedly made a sacrifice. And the Creator himself, or Jesus, before he was in flesh form, when he was in a more powerful state, or like I said, the Creator himself, Elohim himself, made a so-called sacrifice in the Garden of Eden for Adam and Eve's sin. And you're telling me the most powerful sacrifice created by the most powerful being in the cosmos, the very Elohim, made a sacrifice, and it is not enough, so that another sacrifice was needed later on at Calvary, and thousands, probably millions of sacrifices were needed throughout the Old Testament Torah period. So the sacrifice of God in the garden was weak. So God did a sacrifice, and his sacrifice was too weak. So another sacrifice was needed, and many more from the Torah Israelites in the Torah days. When even the Apostle Paul and the writers there in the New Testament are telling you that the sacrifices back then of animals were too weak, they were not good enough, so that Christ was needed, so that Calvary was needed. So what the Apostle Paul in the New Testament and all the other writers who said this stuff are telling you is that the Old Testament sacrifices were all insufficient. They were not good enough. They were too weak. So you're telling me that God did a sacrifice in the Garden of Eden, and what God did was way too weak. So God wasn't smart enough to figure out that this doesn't deal with the situation, but Apostle Pauline from the New Testament can figure out something that God didn't know at the time. That God did too weak a sacrifice. So God is flawed, because you can take your car to the mechanic and they'll do their best to fix it right. You got a tumor, they'll go to the hospital and check you in, and they'll cut it out right. But God can't cut out sin the right way with the so-called first sacrifice in the Garden of Eden. Bam. Hello. But if we look at John 1 and verse 10, when it says, the world knew him not. Now, this word knew, gnosko, G1097 in your Strongs, it says here to learn to know, come to know, get a knowledge of, perceive, feel. It goes on to say stuff like to understand, perceive, have knowledge of. To become acquainted with, to know. And they also add here, it is a Jewish idiom for sexual intercourse between a man and a woman. Kind of reminds me of Yada when it says like Adam knew his wife. Meaning sexual intercourse. So you're talking about deep, close relations. That's why it even uses the word perceive to get you to understand what they're trying to tell you when they use the word knew, when they said, and the world knew him not. So he was in the world, but the world knew him not. And so Messianic teachers on Hebrew side or Christian side will tell you, yeah, because he was in the Old Testament, but people just didn't know him. That is an extreme lie. Let's prove that that is a lie. Because they're saying the world was the world of the Israelites. But now here it's saying the world knew him not. So it is saying here that he was in the world of the Israelite, but the Hebrew Israelite did not know him. In other words, the chosen people did not know him. Now let's run over to Genesis chapter 18, when supposedly God appeared unto Abraham, which I knocked that down a long time ago and showed you that that is just garbage understanding. Genesis chapter 18. I'll read verse 1 and 2, and remember this is when the visitors came to Abraham. Verse 1 and 2. And the Lord appeared unto him in the plains of Mamre, and he sat in the tent door in the heat of the day. And he lifted up his eyes and looked, and lo, 3 men stood by him. And sometimes you'll hear in the Christian circles this was Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. This was the Trinity. But they saw them. He ran to meet them from the tent door and bowed himself toward the ground. So he rushed to meet them and bowed himself. And now he said, my Lord, and he goes on in verse 3. So what they're saying is that Jesus was one of these 3 that men, and he was the Lord that showed up with angels. Now, why would Abraham do this? Trying to get him to stay and eat and so on. They're telling you it's because Abraham knew it was Jesus, knew this was the Son of God. So he rushed to him, prostrated himself, and said, hey, let's make you some food to eat, stay a while. So how come the New Testament is telling you, and New Testament teachers are telling you, that the world in the New Testament is the world of the Israelites, but the same New Testament is telling you, and they're saying that he appeared in the Old Testament, but the same New Testament is telling you in John chapter 1 verse 10 that the world of the Israelite knew and perceived him not. Because it says to perceive him. It perceived him not. So how come Abraham perceived him and knew it was him, according to their erroneous teachings? This is a lie in the New Testament. Because now, look at what it says here. If you look in Genesis 18 and verse 2 that I just read, look at the word for look, H7200, Ra'ah. It says to see, to look at, inspect, perceive, consider. In other words, and we know that Abraham was not an idiot, so you wouldn't say he's an idiot towards spiritual things. And the way that he rushed from where he was sitting and bowed himself right away, he knew this was just not your average commoner and your average person and so on. That's why they're saying this was Jesus. But he rushed like that and constrained the people to stay because he knew supposedly that this was Jesus. This was the Messiah appearing in their Old Testament times. So he looked, or he perceived, he inspected the visitor and knew this was the Son of God, Jesus, showing the Messiah, showing up in Old Testament times. Yet the New Testament is telling you that in Old Testament times he was there in the world of the Israelite, but the Israelites did not perceive him, did not know him. Yet Genesis chapter 18 is telling you that Abraham, an Old Testament person, a pre-Israelite, perceived him and knew him, supposedly. You see how messy it gets? So the New Testament is lying to you that people in the Old Testament did not know him, if, as they claim, he showed up in the Old Testament to these people, which I don't believe, because all of that is garbage. But I have to present it like this to you so that you understand the trickery that has been forced into your mind. It says Abraham inspected and perceived him. Now, when you are inspecting something, like you take out some vegetable and you're looking at it and you want to see, like in your lettuce, if something is running around in it and whatever, and you're washing it and you're cleaning out the lettuce and so on. And you're looking and you're inspecting the food properly. So you're taking a close look at it. Not just a casual look like you're opening the drawers in the fridge and you're looking for something else. No, so you just glance over the lettuce. Now, this time you're washing the lettuce, so you're looking close and you're pulling the leaves apart to see if there's anything in there that needs to be washed out, some dirt or whatever. Inspecting. So Abraham inspected him. The only way he could have inspected him was with his spiritual knowledge. Because we are taught that Abraham is coming out of a legacy coming from Adam through Enoch and so on and through great men who knew the Lord God, Elohim, from the Garden of Eden. So Abraham was beneficiary of all this special, spiritually elite kind of knowledge. So he knew inspect. So he didn't have to wait for him to do any miracle for him to realize. He just knew it internally and inspected him and perceived. But the New Testament tells you that in Old Testament, nobody perceived him. The New Testament teachers that defend this Messiah are in a bind. Their teachings are greatly erroneous. And it repeats it again in the same verse a second time, saying, and when he saw them, he ran. The same saw is the same H7200 Ra'ah, giving the same understanding. So for all of you who like to trip yourself up on a second witness, there in the same verse, it's using the same word again to tell you that you should not doubt that Abraham inspected and perceived this visitor. But the New Testament tells you, the great beloved Apostle John, who should not be lying to us and betraying Jesus since he was the disciple whom Jesus loved, is telling you that no one in the Old Testament recognized him, perceived him. But here, twice in one verse, is telling you that Abraham in the Old Testament perceived him and inspected him. So the world of the Israelite that did not know him in the in the Old Testament, you've got to rethink that teaching. Now, let's show you something more interesting, because it said the world in the New Testament is the world of the Israelite. And apparently, we're supposed to understand that in the New Testament, the world of the Israelite can know that this is Jesus, so they should believe in him and get the Holy Spirit on the day of Pentecost. But the same world of the Israelite in the Old Testament, when the knowledge of God should have been stronger because that's where the laws were dropped, in Old Testament times, the world of the Israelite in the Old Testament cannot know him when the revelation was fresh at Sinai and fresh with Adam and fresh right there with Enoch and fresh with Moses and fresh with Abraham and fresh with Noah and fresh with the patriarchs and fresh with the prophets. That world could not know him according to the beloved John. That world of the Israelite could not know him with all the mighty revelations. In which, let me read this other one for you just to make it sound real nice. Deuteronomy chapter 4 and verse 2. To the world of the Israelites in Old Testament times, in Deuteronomy 4 verse 2, the Most High said, Ye shall not add unto the word which I command you, neither shall ye diminish aught from it, that ye may keep the commandments of the Lord your God which I command you. So he says, don't change anything, which means he deposited all in Old Testament times or in Torah times to the world of the Israelite. That's why Psalm 147, 19 and 20, I'm not going to stop reminding you, said he has not done thus with any other nation in terms of showing them his word. So Jacob, or the world of the Israelite, got the only revelation from God according to the Torah. So they would have all kinds of perception in the Old Testament times. The world of Israelites would have the knowledge and perception and revelation of God. So they would know things. So if anything is happening with God, they're supposed to know it. There's always going to be at least one patriarch or one prophet that's knowing what God is doing, that's able to perceive what God's doing. Because if that's not the case, then we can never have gotten the revelation. So the world of Israelites got revelations through many different people in the Torah. And so, if there was something to perceive, they would perceive it in the Old Testament world of the Israelites. But the New Testament tells you that it's basically only the world of the Israelites in the New Testament, that would actually perceive and know him. So when Jesus, supposedly the Messiah, showed up in the world of the Israelites in the old times, it was impossible and for them to understand and know that's him and could not perceive him. That's what the New Testament is telling you. But I just showed you that Abraham in Old Testament times perceived it in the world of the Israelites. This is crazy. This is crazy. Checkmating the Messianic, who was saying that the revelation is only in Jesus in the New Testament, and without Jesus any other revelation of God in the Old Testament world of the Israelite is insufficient, because that's what they're telling you. By believing in New Testament, they're telling you the revelation of God to Moses at Sinai and the other people is not sufficient to give you salvation or put you in right standing with the Most High, because the new thing has come through Jesus in the New Testament. And so if you are only in the Old Testament world of the Israelites, but you reject the New Testament world of the Israelites and its happenings in New Testament times, you cannot be saved. You are lost because you are not accepting the new thing that God is doing through the New Testament in the world of the New Testament Hebrew Israelite. But that is clearly wrong, because they are rejecting the word of Moses, who I'm questioning nowadays. But you still got to hear it so that you can try to rescue your mind. Begin to think. Now let's look at one last one here. Daniel chapter 3 verse 24 and 25. I'll read it from KJV and the New English Bible with Apocrypha. I'll read it from that one. And here's what it says in this New English Bible. Daniel chapter 3 verse 24 and 25. Then King Nebuchadnezzar, and I don't think you're going to tell me that he was a Shemite, so he's not of the seed of Jacob. Nebuchadnezzar was not a Hebrew Israelite, but a Hamite. That's what you taught me, right? So this Hamite, King Nebuchadnezzar, was amazed. Remember, he threw in the 3 Hebrew boys in the fire, right? And he was amazed and sprang to his feet in great trepidation. You see, like he saw something again, something came to him. He perceived something, like I told you in Genesis 18, 1 and 2, that Abraham perceived something and sprang to his feet, so to speak, and ran toward the visitors. So similar kind of stuff is happening here, where Nebuchadnezzar is perceiving something, so he sprang to his feet in great trepidation. He said to his courtiers, Was it not 3 men whom we threw bound into the fire? They answered the king, Assuredly, your majesty. He answered, Yet I see 4 men walking about in the fire, free and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a god. looks like a god. The fourth looks like a god. Hebrew Israelites and Messianic people in Christianity tell us that this fourth person in this story was the Son of God, or Jesus, that appeared in the world of the Israelites in New Testament times, who could not have been known when he showed up in Old Testament times. So they're telling you that he showed up in the Old Testament world of the Israelites, but they just could not know him. Yet Abraham, I just showed you, knew that he was a visitor from God, according to their teachings, that he was the Most High. But they're telling you they just don't know him. Now, let's look at it from the King James here. Then Nebuchadnezzar, the king, was astonished, and rose up in haste, and spake, and said unto his counselors, so in haste, because he saw something, did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, true, O king. He answered and said, lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And the form of the fourth is like the Son of God. And we know they call Jesus the Son of God in the New Testament world of the Israelites book. So in the KJV, it's saying the Son of God is that fourth one, who they say is the Messiah. And in the New English Bible, it just says he is a God. So basically the same idea. They're saying the Son of God is a God because they claim that this Messiah is God. So now you're telling me that the world of the Israelites is the only world of Israel in New Testament time, different from the world of Israel in the Old Testament time, that could know this Messiah when they saw him. It also means that in the world of the Israelite, you had to be an Israelite to identify him, because only an Israelite could see that and know it in the New Testament. So the New Testament then is letting you know that the world that the revelation came to in New Testament times was the world of the Israelites. And only the people of Jacob in there, like Psalm 147, 19 and 20, would identify. That's why another place, probably Paul said somewhere in the New Testament, that if the princes of the world knew who he was, that he was the Lord of glory, they would not have crucified him. So it's telling you that even though these other Gentiles are around the New Testament world of the Israelite people, the Israelite, they could not identify him for who he was. So that's why they crucified him. Because only the Israelites in the world of the Israelite can identify and know that this is the Son of God, or this is God walking in flesh. Only the Israelite can know that in the world of New Testament Israelite. But Daniel chapter 3 and verse 24 and 25 that I just read to you, checkmating the Messianic, is letting you know that a Hamite king could identify in the Old Testament world the so-called Son of God.
Checkmating the Messianic is letting you know that a Hamite king could identify in the Old Testament world the so-called Son of God.
Checkmating the Messianic is letting you know that a Hamite king could identify in the Old Testament world the so-called Son of God. According to their teachings, this breaks down their teachings, their truth, which means their truth is nothing but a lie. Because in the Old Testament, dealing with matters surrounding the world of the Israelite in the Old Testament, Nebuchadnezzar, a Hamite king, could see and perceive the same way a pre-Israelite Hebrew Abraham could see and perceive the visitor, so-called Son of God, that came to him. You see how messy this gets? A Hamite could see just as well as a pre-Israelite Hebrew Abraham, and could see that this is the Son of God from heaven that appeared, the same way he appeared to Abraham in the Old Testament. Yet the revelation was not given to Hamites or to Gentiles, because Psalm 147, 19 and 20 again says he gave his revelation only to Israel. But here it is. Someone not of the Shemites, someone not of the Hebrew Israelites, King Nebuchadnezzar, who's actually torturing the Hebrews, who are three men of the world of the Israelites, is torturing them, and he was able to see. So God gives him revelation by opening his eyes, and gave him revelation when he was killing Hebrews. What a time to give a Hamite, a Gentile, the Goyim, a revelation. When people are praying for revelation from God, fasting and praying day and night, and sometimes they don't get it, they can't see anything, but the Hamite doing a wicked thing, he already has them under his power, then he's going to go forward to try to kill them, and he gets a revelation for trying to carry out death. And his eyes were opened by the God of heaven to see into the world of the Israelite, to peer into the world beyond the natural world, and to get a revelation so he can tap into the world of the Israelite. Now, do you see why there is so much corruption with the Torah that I'm investigating, and even with the New Testament? Because people who are not Israelites can peer into and have access to the revelations of the world of the Israelite. Of the world of the Israelite. So what is to stop them from messing with your book when they can see into and peer into your world through revelation? You see what I'm saying? This is messy. You need to clean up your doctrine. Checkmating the Messianic. Something is wrong with your teaching about the world of the Israelite and the world. And even Simeon saying, hey, now I can die because now my eyes have seen the baby Jesus, or the baby Hebrew name that you want to place in there. Because letting you know that only in the world of the Israelite can such a thing be seen, can this kind of revelation be given. And then you get some supposed three wise men coming to look for baby Jesus, following a star. How would they have known that this is? So they somehow got access to some revelation about the world of the Israelite. It's like, what's so special about this revelation to the Israelite when any Joe Blow out there can just get access to it and can move based on that revelation and say, let's go visit baby Jesus? This is a serious problem. And he said, did not we cast in three? But here we see four men loose walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And the form of the fourth is like the Son of God. These are the words of a Hamite who was outside the world of the Israelite and was pushing Hebrews to worship images of false gods. But while he's doing all those things and killing the Hebrews for not bowing to his false gods, God says, I love you so much, basically to put it in my way of putting it, that I will give you a revelation while you're trying to set up false god worship in your empire and forcing my people to worship your false god. You are converting my world, my Old Testament world of the Israelite, to worship a false image. But I will reward you for doing that by giving you a revelation, opening your eyes so that you can see and perceive in Old Testament times the living Son of God in the fire. But the New Testament tells you that in the Old Testament they could not see him. The Israelites in the world of the Israelites could not see him. Yet I just showed you that Israelites were able to see him, and even Hamites were able to see him in the Old Testament times. Checkmate for the Messianic. It's lying when it tells you that he was in the world from Old Testament times, but the world knew him not. The New Testament is fake. You have just been checkmated.